Hello, before getting into this video, I'd just like to issue a quick disclaimer. This is an opinion piece. This is all my opinion. Just need to make that clear. This is subjective. This is my subjective opinion that is being expressed in this video. In September, I put out my first video on this channel, where I talked at length about Behringer. This is a sequel to that video. In this video, I'll cover some things which in retrospect should have been addressed in that first video. If you haven't seen it yet, it'll be linked up in the top right corner of the something. I'll be covering more on the Kirn situation, specifically assessing the accusations people have made against Behringer of antisemitism. I'll be taking a deeper look into Behringer's role as disruptor. I'll also be taking a look into the Loopop situation. Well, let's get into it. A disruptor, or disruptive innovator, is a company which utilizes new technology and innovates within a field in a manner which is fundamentally transformative to the field they're operating within, in a manner which results in a disruption of companies which are failing to keep up with these new innovations. At least, this seems to be the going definition. Digital camera technology and the companies who rode that wave disrupted the analog film market, reducing the use of analog film to a highly niche endeavor for hipster weirdos. This effectively leveled the companies that had all of their eggs in the analog film basket. The smartphone, and in particular Apple, disrupted a lot of industries all at the same time, leveling companies like Nokia, BlackBerry, Garmin, TomTom, impacting even the camera industry, the print media industry, and the watch industry, to name only a few. New technologies and the companies who back them early will become the disruptors, and the legacy companies who stood by, unwavering in their old methods, are the disrupted, often going out of business entirely as they fail to keep up with the unrelenting levels of competition from the disruptor. So why the hell am I talking about this in a video about Behringer? On July 11th of 2021, Behringer made a post referencing an article talking about disruption. In this post, Behringer implies that they are a disruptor. They don't say it directly, they do everything but outright stating it, framing it more as a question. Are we disruptors? They imply that they are, to the point of correcting someone in the comments who says that they're not. And they even go as far as to highlight the aspects of the definition which align with how they operate. So what is Behringer bringing to the party in terms of disruptive innovation? On the surface, Behringer will tell you it's their customer obsession, informing their lowest prices, highest level of accessibility approach. This is all well and fine as a basic statement of intent, but what are they actually doing that's resulting in disruption? Reissuing classic synth designs that have been left out of production for decades, and doing that at scale across a number of designs. That's some nice disruption right there. But when they remake mutable instruments modules, where's the disruption coming from there? They have a larger production capacity due to the size of their operations, so can afford to mass produce their products, therefore sell them cheaper than a smaller company like Mutable Instruments can afford to do. Another factor to look at is their propensity to borrowing and taking inspiration from other products currently within the market. This allows them to save on market testing, as they're not really taking risks on a potentially good product. They know this product is good and that people want it, and they're able to leverage their production capacity to make these products cheaper than anyone else can. It's hard to find Behringer products that add anything like truly new or innovative. They do at times make improvements to the products they're remaking. And I must admit, I'm rather impressed by the BX700, just on a conceptual level. They've combined a few really cool elements all into one machine. The sound engine of the DX7, CS80 filter, and a drum machine. It's a really cool concept for a groove box, but despite what it brings to the party, it looks like it's somewhere between a Volca and an Electron box. But they've combined these inspirations in such a manner that, in my opinion, it is genuinely adding something to the party. This is good. And I would like to see more of this, but this isn't too common for them. The overwhelming majority of their products seem to add very little to the original product or idea which was generated, developed, and market tested by a different company. To be clear, they do add some extra features and functions to their reissues. As well, despite how in the first video I ragged on the Poly D for being a misrepresented parody, it genuinely adds to the original Mini Moog design in a very cool manner. However, they rarely come out with any product that can simply be called original or innovative. Unless I'm thoroughly mistaken, this level of R&D does cost real money, and part of Behringer's innovation in their approach is to save on R&D costs by cutting out a lot of the steps that other companies have to go through. So Behringer's innovation is to have large factories for cheap mass production, allowing them to operate at relatively thin margins, cutting costs wherever possible, including R&D, and releasing products that feed into nostalgia, hype, and general fervor around analog. One aspect of their customer obsession is that they really do listen to their customers and their desires. They check in with their base regularly, running ideas past them through Facebook posts. In a way, by polling with their customers before making big production decisions, this is like a microcosm of market research. They're effectively doing polling and sentiment analysis, allowing the desires of the people to inform a lot of their decisions. I actually have a lot of respect for this approach, but there is a flip side to this which is worth keeping in mind. By creating a feedback loop between the customer and Behringer, what has come from that and will continue to come from it is the realization of products driven by popularity. New ideas which break the mold in interesting and innovative ways are unlikely to come from this approach, since as a general rule, people en masse struggle with change. Innovation, by its nature, is untested. The community that Behringer is fostering isn't interested in innovation, but instead the infinite recapitulation of synths that they already know that they love. These synths were innovative at one point in time. They were a risk that a company had to take a gamble on to create. The reason I call out this approach for reducing the potential for innovation is that to this day, we're still seeing innovation with modern analog synths. Arturia is my favorite example of this, as I have and love the Matrix Brute. Bloop. And Keystep, Microbrute. In most aspects of its construction, it's a basic analog synth, but the patch bay is digital and laid out in the most intuitive manner, opening up the field of potential sound design to levels unfathomable without an overkill modular setup. By having elegant digital routing of analog circuits, this synth has, for me, changed the game. At this stage, with how good digital has become, analog loses a lot of its inherent strength. The primary strength is that since it is discrete, it forces you to work within its limitations, which can be good for creativity, and it's all laid out on the surface. Arturia has understood this, then distilled and refined this down into the Matrix Brute and the Polybrute. This is the kind of innovation I want to be seeing more of. There's actually a lot of ideas one could implement into the design of analog synths that haven't been done yet. At this stage, I don't have faith in Behringer to be bringing these innovations to the party. It's actually too risky for them, and they seem too scared of losing money on testing a potentially good but untested idea. Okay, so if Behringer is so disruptive, what is it that they're disrupting? Synth companies had lost track of consumer demand, and they operated under and perpetuated the myth of analog synths being luxury products. Without this fundamental aspect of the narrative being brought into question, synth companies could afford to charge very high prices for analog gear. These companies could afford to spend a lot on R&D, the highest quality components, paying their workers well, good attention to detail, and quality control. They could afford to make their instruments at a very high quality standard because the money was present to do that. The market demand was there for it. But when Behringer steps onto the scene, committed to finding the lowest price points for these highly sought-after bits of analog equipment, they effectively swept the leg of the entire industry, pulling the foundations out from under it. Since the higher-level players in this game had all agreed on the fundamental aspects of the game they were playing, they were all willing to play fair with each other. It was in all of their best interests to be releasing high-quality, expensive analog synths. Even if it was possible to make their synths cheaper, it worked better for them and their employees not to do that. But did this work out better for the customer? If you've bought into the notion that analog is the best and you must have analog synths to make music with, then no, this isn't great for the customer. Plenty of entry-level synths did appear in the market, as the demand for any and all analog gear was high enough to warrant that, but to get a decent poly or the more highly kitted out monos, that was all reserved for the higher price points. Behringer has destroyed the line between entry-level and high-end. The Pro 800 is priced within the entry-level category, and it's as capable as many offerings within the high-end category. This is great for those who want analog synths. It also means that synth companies need to adapt to these new market conditions. This is hard, though, as their systems are constructed in such a way that is not optimized for the price competition brought in by Behringer. So, Behringer making the post I referenced before from 2021, framing themselves as a disruptor and viewing such a label as a badge of honor, tells you a lot about the philosophy which guides their corporate culture. Since they don't have any disruptive new technology, the element which is disruptive is their approach. And you know what? I'm willing to hand this to them. They have been very successful in disrupting the synth industry. Kirn and misunderstandings around anti-Semitism. Something I didn't really think to comment on or even raise at all when talking about Kirn and the Corksniffer situation in the first video was anti-Semitism. In this section of this video, I'm going to be discussing anti-Semitism. This is quite a complex and nuanced topic which might be triggering for some people, so here's a trigger warning. I'm about to discuss anti-Semitism. If you're uncomfortable with this topic of discussion, now is the time to skip ahead to the next section of the video where I discuss Loopop. Timestamp is on the screen now as well. You can click the chapter heading thing for the next section. This is Future Robert from the edit. Just wanted to address, since I've started putting this video together, there's a whole situation unfolding with the Israel and Palestine. This video does not cover that, does not address that. The level of analysis that I go into is not sufficient to really capture what's going on in that situation. Yeah, so the analysis in this video addresses anti-Semitism through the lens of Western culture and specifically how it relates to the Behringer situation, and does not factor in the issues that relate to the current conflict. I mean, I try and take in some of the historical context and stuff like that, but yeah, so just disclaimer, I'm not discussing it in how it relates to the Israel-Palestine conflict that's currently unfolding. Another thing I forgot to mention is that Peter Kirn is not Jewish. That is an important bit of context that I have now given. Okay, back to the video. In the Corksniffer video, Peter Kirn is depicted in a way that I believe was intended to be a representation of a dorky, cucked, beta nerd Pinocchio. As Behringer sees it, Kirn lies, and therefore his nose grows, like Pinocchio. Plus, in their thinking, they've depicted him to look like a pathetic beta nerd. My personal opinion, I genuinely believe this is what was intended by Behringer. However, there is another interpretation, which in retrospect I should have at least acknowledged, but didn't really think about enough to take seriously. That's on me. There's an anti-Semitic meme called The Happy Merchant. Admittedly, there is a resemblance between that meme and Behringer's depiction of Kirn. My interpretation is that this is an unfortunate accident, although not everyone agrees and some ascribe intentionality to this resemblance. This has resulted in Behringer receiving a lot of negative attention. The reason this resemblance has occurred is complex, but I'll attempt to lay it out simply. Anti-Semitism goes way back and runs very deep throughout many cultures. Jews have been the default punching bag for centuries. There's many factors which play into this, but the most important factor is cultural inertia and socially reinforced interpretations of reality. I'll attempt to break this apart and explain what I mean. If you think of the development of the collective thought within society as having a snowball-like flywheel quality to it, once it begins moving in a certain direction, it might be slow to gain energy and momentum, but once it picks up in speed and intensity, it gains more and more energy and strength until it hits a terminal velocity of sorts, becoming deeply instantiated within the collective space of cultural thinking, memetics, and symbology. This same dynamic is present with fads, but occurring at a much faster speed, and instead of becoming culturally instantiated, the fad fails to maintain itself and dies. The difference being that a fad inherently has little true grounding to it, allowing for it to take off, become widely popular for a time, before quickly dying out. Take the Harlem Shake, Gangnam Style, those dumb little pet rock pets from the 70s, the Ice Bucket Challenge, flannel shirts in the 90s. The snowball gains mass too quickly and it flings apart. It doesn't have staying power. The flywheel spins faster than its structural integrity allows for, and it breaks. Fads are implicitly surface-level developments. We understand them well and see them for what they are since they move so quickly, but deeper cultural developments that exist at a more fundamental level of our collective thinking are far less visible to us as they move very slowly in relation to us over the course of hundreds to thousands of years. They become the conceptual waters that we swim in, therefore hard for us to see and identify. The notions of freedom, liberty, and democracy fit into this category. These are very deep ideas that we almost take for granted due to how fundamental they are to our thinking and how long they've been in the works, developing and building away within our cultural and conceptual development. My assessment of the situation, based on the research I've done, is that this is where anti-Semitism seems to exist. Anti-Semitism has a deep and storied history that seems to have taken hold early on in the existence of Judaism. Now, Judaism is one of the world's oldest monotheistic religions. A large force in the ancient world was that of group competition. Judaism was targeted as a basic expression of in-group, out-group dynamics and competition, desiring one's own group to do better economically and socially than another's. As is common between religions, when two opposing belief systems interact, they become hostile to each other, as a common operating principle is that the success of one requires the destruction of the other. As time passed, this dynamic of hostility towards Judaism evolved into new forms. Say, when Christianity splintered off from Judaism, a narrative formed blaming the Jewish people for the death of Christ, amongst other perceived injustices. This general environment of animosity gave rise to conspiratorial thinking about the Jews, and as a culture, they were excluded from most forms of economic engagement within the societies they found themselves, leaving them in a position where they could only hold positions as moneylenders. The societies in which this happened had a split perspective on this. This role held value to these societies, but at the same time, it was looked upon as being evil. So when things in these societies stopped working too well, there was an easy scapegoat. They blamed their Jewish population and would violently remove them. The displaced Jews would then be stranded and find a new place to settle down. But the narratives that had existed around them were socially transmissible and followed them. As they spread, a sort of Chinese whispers, telephone-like generation loss effect occurred on these narratives, allowing them to morph, change, and adapt over time. The underlying sentiment remains the same throughout all of this, but the means in which this sentiment expressed itself would mutate and evolve to adapt to the new conditions. And as the Jewish people have been continually cast in the role of the villain, they've had to adopt strategies in order to survive, which these strategies have from the perspective of those, casting and developing these anti-Semitic narratives, played into these narratives and strengthened their negative perceptions. This has led to a plethora of occurrences of Jews being violently purged from societies. This cycle has repeated numerous times, culminating in most recent memory with the Holocaust. The nature of conspiracy theorizing results in ideas informed by sentiment. The sentiment is persistent. Even once the surface-level ideas are debunked and disproven, their roots still remain deeply embedded within the collective consciousness as a latent sentiment. And when the conditions allow for it, these sentiments take new forms, again casting the Jews as some form of villain. As elements of the deep conspiracy are able to catch and contort into new forms, better adapted to where the collective consciousness is at, the sentiment of hate that underlies anti-Semitism is able to take hold. There are two results of this process which are important for us to consider. One directly relevant to the Kirn situation, and one which is less directly relevant to this situation, but broadly worth being aware of. In relation to Kirn, it means that former cultural instantiations of anti-Semitism have influenced the symbolic landscape. Symbolism related directly to anti-Semitism has propagated itself independently of the conscious thoughts that gave rise to them. The symbology born from anti-Semitism that has detached itself from direct anti-Semitism retains the ability to unconsciously recapitulate anti-Semitic sentiments. This comes down to the power of stereotypes and the human need for heuristic shorthands when interpreting reality, which is a big part of how anti-Semitism continues to propagate itself over time. In interpreting reality, we need to simplify the complex. This is done with narratives. These narratives can take on a life of their own and can result in the types of worldviews which are immune to the reasoning which informs different narratives. What Behringer did with the Kirn video was an unconscious recapitulation of anti-Semitic imagery. They borrowed from the symbolic landscape in order to create an image of Peter Kirn that they considered to be disparaging, but the symbolic landscape is tainted by thousands of years of race hate. I genuinely believe this was accidental on Behringer's part, but it does point to a larger problem, which brings us to the second important thing to consider, less directly relevant to this situation. The sentiment of anti-Semitism is still alive and well. The surface-level instantiation of anti-Semitism was mostly dispelled following World War II. A lot of thought was directed after the Holocaust to understand what happened and to try and ensure it wouldn't happen again. This created the illusion that anti-Semitism was behind us. Unfortunately, the underlying sentiments hadn't been entirely removed and managed to go underground. These sentiments aren't the result of clear thinking, but are instead a result of desperation and a desire to make sense of the world, fueled by an ideology that caters to these fears. People who are susceptible to these ideas are often in this state of desperation and fear and are rarely able to engage in clear, critical thought. And therefore, when an explanation is provided to them that there's a global conspiracy of Jews controlling the world, and this global conspiracy is responsible for their economic situation and the things going wrong in their lives, these people don't necessarily have the tools to see what's really happening, and they fall for the convenient narrative with thousands of years of development and many deep conspiracies relating to and branching off from it. A lot of this comes down to a collective failure in understanding, education, and empathy. Another aspect of this that I feel the need to address is lizard people. I was called out by one commenter in the first video for utilizing an image of lizard people when discussing capitalism. My intention was to invoke this imagery to borrow the symbolic sentiment of heartless capitalists behave in a manner so detached from normal reality that it becomes difficult to ascribe human-like qualities to them. I was using symbolic hyperbole to convey a point by invoking the image of lizard people. My understanding of the lizard people meme is that it's a psychotic projection people use to explain and understand large-scale, high-level systems dynamics that are difficult to understand clearly, without a decent understanding of how these systems actually work, which are complex and hard to understand, and without an ability to engage critically with thought, one becomes vulnerable to such memes and might buy into these conspiracy theories. So, in a way, that image perfectly represents an embodied conception of those dynamics. But as was pointed out in the comments, the lizard people conspiracy has many connections to various instantiations of anti-Semitism, and therefore has some less than ideal implications and connotations, and could be perceived as a dog whistle, which was not my intention. I actually see what I've done by invoking the lizard people meme as the exact type, exact same category of mistake as what Behringer has made with the Corksniffer video. The difference, and I think it's an important difference, is that Behringer was making an unambiguously disparaging representation in a manner that was targeted against a journalist, whilst the anti-Semitic interpretation fuels a lot of the hate Behringer has received for the Corksniffer incident. I don't believe it's a fair read on the situation, but I think taking issue with Behringer targeting Kirn is fair. Proportionality in response is important, and assessing intentions is important when doing that. The reason I'm bothering to emphasize this issue in this video isn't to cast aspersions at Behringer. It arguably has nothing to do with synthesizers, synth culture, or synth production, but a big player in the synthesizer production game accidentally stepped into this territory, and it's caused many people to claim that Behringer is anti-Semitic because of it. In the first video I did on Behringer, I deliberately steered away from this since I don't believe they did that on purpose, therefore didn't see the need to address that aspect of the situation. In retrospect, I should have at least acknowledged it, but also didn't want to acknowledge it without laying out everything I just laid out here, as it's such a sensitive topic and such a large issue still in our world today that I believe it requires at least this level of attention and depth when being discussed. So, does this impact my overall assessment of the Kirn situation? Not even slightly. This aspect of the situation does point to a larger issue that we should all be very aware of, but I find it very hard to ascribe intentionality on Behringer's part for this. In all my research into Behringer, I've seen nothing to indicate that they're motivated by anti-Semitic sentiments, and therefore I believe it's unfair to call them anti-Semites because of this. Moving on to other aspects of the Kirn situation, which is more relevant to one's assessment of Behringer. A perspective I wasn't aware of that has been flagged in the comments by a few people comes down to changing cultural expectations. Supposedly in the 90s, stuff like this was far more acceptable, fitting into the category of satire and parody. As well, since Peter Kirn was technically in the synth game, having released his own synth, the Meblip, one can take the perspective that he is in fact biased journalistically. His connoisseurial persona can be seen as justifying him being called a Corksniffer. Him being branding focused yet not owning his own name can be perceived as funny and grounds for satire. Hence, Behringer trademarking Kirn is ironic because perhaps Peter Kirn should have already owned the trademark to his own name. I'm glad I encountered this perspective, as I suspect this had to be the mode of thinking that Behringer was engaged in when they did the whole Corksniffer thing. This mode of thinking seems to perfectly align with how they behaved during all of this. From this perspective, it's very easy to miss how implicitly mean-spirited such a move is. This sort of thing may have been acceptable in the 90s, but culture has moved on. The cultural goalposts have shifted. My subjective take is that even whilst understanding all of this, it's still a very immature move to have made, and I think the general public response bears out that most people have moved beyond such a mindset in which such behavior is acceptable. This situation, in and of itself, isn't even damning for Behringer in my eyes, but it's the sort of behavior which is unacceptable from such a powerful entity, and they were rightly called out as it is inappropriate. Even if Kirn had a foot in the game, his foot, it didn't look like his foot was massively in. He made one small little synth, like maybe two. His foot was barely in. I personally stand by the position that the Corksniffer situation was uncalled for, and Behringer should have handled their irritation towards Kirn in a healthier manner. They did apologize, and credit should be granted due to that. There's been a lot of discussion in other areas of our culture as to what is acceptable when it comes to apologizing, how does an entity truly convey sincerity when apologizing, and the unfortunate truth of the matter is, some people will never accept an apology as being sincere enough. At which point, even attempting to sincerely apologize can be viewed as a losing strategy. There's more I could get into on this, but it'd stray too much further away from the general topic of this video. This would be a good time to discuss the Loopop situation. There's a lot to get into here. The post which sparked off this whole situation is located within Behringer's private, sanctioned Facebook group. Upon submitting for entry, I was approved within 2 seconds. It's pretty much exactly what you'd expect. Behringer's loyalists sharing and talking about Behringer gear. I tried to search through this group to find the original post, as I can't find much context in articles covering the situation, but my browser ran out of memory and crashed somewhere around the posts from mid-August. Loopop's Twitter post, which brought this situation to public attention, was made on the 3rd of August 2023. From what I gather, the original post had something to do with the Toro synth, and so someone made a comment on this post which provoked this response from Behringer. Interesting comment. It's the 5th best-selling product. Not sure this is called a flop, smiley face. I'm sure Starsky will be reviewing it as, while Loopop is not reviewing products as we don't send out free units. So Loopop responded to this, but had their comments deleted, hence moving to Twitter to respond. This is my response they deleted/blocked. Hey Behringer, this is Ziv, Loopop. Please stop spreading the lie that I stopped reviewing your units because you wouldn't send me any for free. I first reviewed your synths without any contact with you, Model D, Neutron. At that point you offered to send me a few others, which I accepted and disclosed. When you made the offensive video about Peter Kirn and started copying affordable products from existing manufacturers with zero innovation, swing, I became disgusted with your corporate culture, which I see now includes spreading lies like you did now. A couple of years ago, you disclosed to me your entire roadmap and offered anything I'd like, and I refused because of what I mentioned above as I explained to Dan. I am happy to share this correspondence if you insist on lying about why I stopped reviewing your gear. If you apologize and at some point change your ways, I would be happy to explore interesting, affordable, innovative products, whether you send them to me or not. They're not that expensive compared to the time and costs of making my videos. Now, this sparked quite a bit of discourse and has brought a lot of negative attention towards Behringer. Sonic State appears to show their support. Bo Beats isn't surprised at all by Behringer lying. Ben Jordan gives Behringer a bit of a toasty roasty. Midlife Synthesist came in with support as well, and so did Liam Killen. Peter Kirn even made a guest appearance commenting on the echo chamber nature of the Behringer-sanctioned Facebook community. Since this incident, Behringer has gone pretty hard into playing the victim. The influencer elite and media won't support them anymore. The entirety of their direct response to this situation is really to not respond to it. So Loopop's original post was on the 3rd of August. On the 5th of August, Behringer made a post to their Facebook page, encouraging people into their private Facebook group. The next day, 6th of August, they make 2 posts, both, quote, direct testimonials from people who have been granted access to music creation gear due to Behringer products they can afford. My read on this is that this is Behringer's attempt to set the narrative back on track, getting people focused on what Behringer wants them to focus on and away from the other stuff which might make Behringer seem less than appealing to buy from. The next day, 7th of August, they make another post ushering people into their private Facebook group. Now, they made a few interesting posts on the 8th of August. First, they make a post addressing the Loopop situation. Without using any names, of course, they publicly state their policy in regards to media promotion. Why we don't pay to play. We understand that our social media administrators may not always get it right, as they may not be aware of the complete history or the changing nature of people and situations. However, we have implemented clear marketing policies to avoid any conflicts of interest. We do not pay for reviews from media or influencers. If they choose not to support us for any reason, we are perfectly fine with it. We do not engage in paid advertisements. We have stopped providing free gear to influencers. We may offer free equipment to individuals who actively contribute to the design, testing, or create performances and tutorials as compensation for their time. We firmly believe that our customers are fully capable of evaluating the equipment themselves and making informed decisions. Our primary goal is to pass on the savings directly to them. If this means we lose sales because the media and influencers won't support us, we don't care. Our only concern is ensuring the integrity and authenticity of our products and maintaining transparency with our customers. We understand that not everyone likes us because we are disrupting the market, but nothing will stop us from delivering utmost value to our customers. That's what we stand for, and this will never change. Cool. So, Behringer's narrativization here casts themselves as the unambiguous good guys in the situation, whilst ignoring any and all detail relevant to the actual situation. Behringer is presenting a very specific lensing on the situation, which seems entirely reasonable, taken outside the context of what actually happened. Their next post that day is a product tease. Then comes what appears to be an apology. At first glance, you read, "We screwed up." And given the context, this should be an apology relating to Loopop. You'd expect something to follow indicating that they recognize their handling of the situation was immature and they'll make moves to improve into the future. But no, they're talking about delays in product launches due to the pandemic. They present it with the sincerity you'd want from a real apology, but it's all about delays. Given the context and timing, this sort of reads like a joke. They're so sure of themselves in the Loopop situation that by inflating their sincerity in apologizing for what is admittedly still an issue with delays and stuff, but nowhere near as immediate or pressing of an issue warranting such a heartfelt apology, I can't help but to think this whole thing was written as a joke. Perhaps they sincerely wanted to apologize for delays, and that was the exact time they felt it needed to happen. So perhaps my joke interpretation of that post is unfair, but Regardless, given the temporal proximity to the Loopop situation and how the surrounding posts are so clearly responding to this situation, it demonstrates that they're unwilling to give any form of sincere apology for lying about Loopop. Then, again, August 8th, still, they make a post stating, "Purpose before profit. At Behringer, we pay zero dividends to shareholders and we reinvest all our earnings. This is the reason why we're selling our products at such low prices, and at times even below cost." Okay, again, redirect focus, redirect the narrative, remind people of what's important, a love of making synths and selling them at low prices. In the immediate aftermath of the Loopop situation, it benefits their narrative to remind everyone that they're not making synths to make money, but out of the love of making synths more affordable. I'd like to address this aspect of the narrative by saying that one can do the wrong thing for the right reasons, and Behringer having noble goals doesn't mean that their actions are excused. I'm not here to say that Behringer is doing the wrong thing, simply that their lack of humility demonstrates a seeming inability to entertain the idea that they even might be, and to the degree that they might privately contemplate what they're doing as being questionable. Openly speaking about it is perceived as too risky for their current PR strategy. Or perhaps they see it as being weak. I personally think that synths being affordable is a noble goal to have. The thing is, Behringer's outright unwillingness to take responsibility for their mishandling of the Loopop situation is concerning, and indicates that this behavior is likely to recur again in the future. They seem too closed off to critical engagement, and this has resulted in a deep polarization amongst the synth community. As much as I have respect for Behringer's goals and think that more people having access to music production and creation gear is a good thing, I think it's important to assess them with open eyes. And whilst I like part of the picture, there's an aspect of the picture which many rightfully don't appreciate. I don't want Behringer to fail. I think a lot of what they're doing is really cool, which is the initial source of my conflict on the subject. I want to like them, but what I can't do is ignore their behavior. What I want from them is to see some openness to acknowledging their faults and taking steps to sincerely address them. I know that I myself and many others who have issues with Behringer as a company would be very open and willing to accept a sincere apology from them, or even at least an acknowledgement that they understand why their behavior is perceived in the way that it is. I will always remain optimistic and open to the possibility of positive change, but at this stage I worry that it's unlikely to happen. To conclude, I own a Behringer K2 and a Midas MR18 sitting right back there. Midas is owned by Behringer, so in effect, it's a Behringer product. I have no regrets about owning these, and I'm not here to shame anyone who owns Behringer gear. We all come to conclusions around purchasing decisions in our own individual ways. What I'd like to encourage is clearer thinking around the purchasing decisions that we make. I don't want to increase the polarization within the conversation around Behringer. I think this situation needs to be handled with clear, critical thinking, understanding, and empathy. I want to live in the reality in which I can be a Behringer fanboy, but for that to happen, there's a few changes I'll need to see from Behringer first. Okay, so this video was the follow-up to my first video on Behringer. I felt I hadn't sufficiently covered some important stuff in that video, hence this video. And unless there's some dramatic new developments, I'm unlikely to cover Behringer again for a good while, if ever. I have many other videos on synth, creative, and music-related topics in the works, and to be entirely honest, I likely wouldn't have finished and released this video if it wasn't for the fact that I said I would at the end of the MS-20 video. Admittedly, stating that was a mistake. But here you go. Here's this video. Yeah, I have other things I'd rather put my attention towards than this synth company. Okay then. I want to hear your thoughts, comments, opinions, etc. Do you agree or disagree with what I've put forward? Am I being unfair to Behringer? Are there things that I clearly haven't considered that perhaps I should? I want to know. Please let me know. Anyways, if you watched this entire video, thank you. I really appreciate that. Hitting like and subscribe would be very helpful. Also, if you like analog synth music, my band's debut album, Rogue Planet, is available now on Spotify, Apple Music, and YouTube. My band is Cyberspace Oblivion, and we make conceptual space synth. Rogue Planet is about humanity dealing with a rogue planet on a crash course for Earth. The album soundtracks the events of this story, although the story itself has not been released. I have a Patreon where I post vlog updates and might put some early release content up there too. To be entirely frank, I haven't worked out what content to put up on Patreon yet, so my general plan is vlog updates, and I might work in some exclusive content and early access stuff in the future too. Might even do some live streams there at some point. I like games, so I might do gaming live streams. I don't know. Signing up for my Patreon massively helps this channel and allows me to keep making these videos, so any support there would be massively appreciated. Okay, bye.